going on, everybody? Good to be with you. I'm Michael Millerman. Just a couple of quick articles to look at today in this brief live stream we'll be doing. Jordan Peterson resigned as a tenured professor at the University of Toronto. I'm sure many of you saw that. If you haven't, you should definitely take a look at his article, Jordan Peterson, Why I Am No Longer a Tenured Professor at the University of Toronto. And he did a video where he reads this article out, so there's no need for us to read it out. But what you'll see is he unleashes himself against diversity, inclusion, and equity. He explains how diversity, inclusion, and equity is destroying his fields of study. He goes on the attack against the professors and against others who are not standing up to it, but who are bowing down before it. So you should definitely have a look at this article, or on Peterson's YouTube channel, his reading of it. But one of the things that, among other things, was pretty surprising and kind of interesting is that towards the end of the article, you'll see the following. So again, he's really hammering away, not just as you see on diversity, inclusion, and inequity, but also on environmental, social, and governance scores. All of this has professors and administrators and others just going along sheep-like, generating, as you see here, a veritable fifth column within their businesses, and really accusing people who go along with all of this of being blind, cowed, and cowardly. But for regular viewers of the channel, it may be most surprising when he mentions Vladimir Putin, because it's not what you would expect, I would guess. Jordan Peterson attacking diversity, inclusion, equity, resigning as a tenured professor, going on the offensive against all of these academic monstrosities. And yet here we have Putin come up in this article. So here's the context. He says, do you know that Vladimir Putin himself is capitalizing on this woke madness? And Memory, Middle Eastern Media Research Institute.org, covered Putin's recent speech, and Peterson goes on to quote from the article. So I thought it could be valuable for us to just, to have a look at that article that he quotes from together. So let me make sure that you can see this. This is January 11th, 2022, Russia's new conservative ideology to counter liberalism. Hello in the chat, by Anna Mayer Barducci. And even though it says it's 48 minutes to listen to, there's a long appendix that we're going to skip and just hit the main part of this article and see what it is that Jordan Peterson saw about Russia's new conservative ideology to counter liberalism, and why he thought it was relevant to mention Putin and Russian conservatism in his National Post resignation letter, as it were. Renowned Russian academic Sergei Karaganov describes Russian President Vladimir Putin's speech at the latest October Valdai Forum as the first major and strong call for reinventing Russian ideology for Russia and the world. And by the way, those of you who don't know, Valdai is this annual gathering Putin speaks at. And if you go over his previous remarks, for example, 2014, 2015, Valdai speeches, it's a good place to look for past articulations of Russian ideology, Russian political theory, Eurasian vision, a vision of the Russian world, Ruski Mir. So I recommend past Valdai speeches as well, but let's have a look at what we have here. So again, it was called the first major and strong call for reinventing Russian ideology, which is not something that Russia's constitution formally has permitted, as claiming that Russia has no official ideology. Indeed, Putin's speech can be viewed as an ideological manifesto that tries to put Russia back in the center of the world's political map. Well, we know, because of all of our high-quality time together, that Russia has a well-articulated, well-established, thoroughgoing, comprehensive ideology developed by Alexander Dugan, sometimes spelled that way in the chat. And just a reminder that I have translated many of Dugan's books over the years. I have a couple of courses on Dugan in my school. So if this question of Russian ideology is interesting to you, you should definitely have a look at some of those sources. Karaganov, who has been the Kremlin's advisor on foreign policy for 12 years, explains that for many years, the economy was the central factor for countries and societies. Quote, "It's the economy, stupid," unquote. However, history proves something else. Yes, people are driven by economic interests, but when they are partially satisfied, when at the bare minimum no one starves, they turn to other interests like security, national pride, ideological views, cultural stereotypes and needs. That is, phenomena and values of a higher order, Karaganov states. So not all reducible to the economy. For this reason, Putin believes that if Russia manages to shape a new ideology, it could have the same attractive power that it had under the Soviet Union with communism, despite its shrinking economy. However, since communism failed, Putin needs new values and ideas to counter the West. Now, in yesterday's live stream, as you remember, we looked at Russia's strategic conservatism, as presented by the CSIS think tank. And here we're going to see what Middle Eastern Memory Research Institute has to say about Russia's new conservative ideology. I've been banging this drum personally for 10 years, having started translating Alexander Dugan's writings in 2011. But okay, let's have a look at the article. The conservative views we hold are an optimistic conservatism. According to Karaganov, the West, after dominating the economy, politics, ideology, and culture for 500 years, finds itself in ideological decline. All powers, if they want to be great, must have a set of ideas leading forward. When these ideas were lost, great powers ceased to be great or simply disintegrated. This happened to Rome. This happened in the 17th century to Spain. This happened to the Soviet Union when we lost the communist idea that led us. A good book, by the way, about this moment where Soviet intellectuals who were against the Soviet Union found themselves at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. You can look at Black Wind, White Snow by Charles Clover. Has a nice section there on Dugan. This happened to the Soviet Union when we lost the communist idea that led us. It was false, but it was there. This happened to the great European powers, which got tired and abandoned their ideas in favor of a pan-European one that pushed them forward for some time. But it has run out of steam now, and they've started to crumble, Karaganov opines. Isn't it the same thing going on in the US? No longer a clear ideological alternative or model. Is not the United States and the West more generally going through ideological decline, where the old categories of right and left somehow aren't mapping when you have Glenn Greenwald on Tucker Carlson and people like Steve Bannon, economic populists, kind of a traditionalist. Revival would probably be too strong a word, but some traditionalists in America, some Heideggerians, people like Darren Beattie. But what's the official ideological line of the contemporary West is not so clear. You could say it finds itself in ideological decline. Also, another reason why people like Zemmour are attracting attention. They're offering an account, ideological account of the West. But okay, so Karaganov had righted that, again, if you have the disintegration of the ideology, you have a bit of a problem. Furthermore, according to Putin, liberalism has failed, and the new progressive liberal ideas pushed forward by the West show only a loss of values and identity. Hence, to counter the liberal elite in the West, Putin suggests for Russia to become the beacon of conservatism and traditionalism. We see, just like in yesterday's article on strategic conservatism, a clear ideological option for Russia. We could extend that and say a clear ideological program for all countries, peoples, and organizations who are trying to not go down the path of liberal progressive ideas. The conservative views we hold are an optimistic conservatism, Putin affirmed at the Valdai Forum. I'm just checking the chat here for a minute. Moderate conservatism, yeah, it could be it. That's what he called it. Let's look back at the article. Putin further states that values are a, quote, unique product of cultural and historical development of any nation, unquote. For this reason, the West should not promote in other countries values and ideas that stand in contrast with the local culture and tradition. The social and cultural shocks that are taking place in the United States and Western Europe are none of our business. We're keeping out of this, Putin said. In his speech manifesto, and again, just to remind you, we're reading this Middle Eastern Media Research Institute article from January 11th, and the reason we are is because Jordan Peterson referred to it in his very widely shared letter to the National Post, or article in the National Post, that he's resigning as a tenured professor from the University of Toronto. Towards the end of his article, he mentioned Putin's remarks drawn from this document. So that gives us the reason, among others, to look at this together. In his speech manifesto, Putin listed point by point the ideas in the West that he challenges. In a way, in his speech, Putin tries to outline what Russian anti-liberal philosopher Alexander Dugan calls the fourth political theory. Now, you can hardly blame me for taking the opportunity to remind you that Alexander Dugan is someone I've been working on for many years, almost 10 years now. I have a couple of courses on Dugan at my school. You go to millermanschool.com and you'll see them. One on the book called The Fourth Political Theory, one on a book series of his called Noomachia. And I agree with this analysis that we get an important insight into Russian anti-liberal ideology by means of Dugan's ideas. So let's go back here. So Putin listed point by point the ideas in the West that he challenges. In a way, in his speech, he tries to outline what Russian anti-liberal philosopher Alexander Dugan calls the fourth political theory. Dugan classifies three political theories in order of appearance that characterized the 20th century. This will be familiar to many viewers of this channel. Liberalism, the first theory, communism, the second theory, and fascism, the third theory. Fascism emerged later than the other major political theories and disappeared before them. The alliance between liberalism and communism, in combination with Adolf Hitler's geopolitical miscalculations, were responsible for the demise of fascism. Fascism's disappearance cleared the battlefield for the first and second political theories, whose Cold War duel created a bipolar world that lasted nearly half a century. The 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union signaled the victory of liberalism over communism. Thus, by the end of the 20th century, liberalism remained the only theory standing. However, liberalism itself has become increasingly decadent. Quote, today's liberalism is so rotten within that it's easy enough to throw out now because it itself has recognized progress, freedom, and development to be absolute fictions. Liberalism has recognized that it's a kind of particular totalitarian approach. Behind all these ideas of liberation, freedom, equality, individualism, etc., stands none other than the will to power, Dugan explains. Therefore, to avoid backsliding into communism and fascism, Dugan suggests that a fourth political theory is needed, one based on the rejection of postmodernism, the post-industrial society, liberal thought realized in practice, and globalism. Hence, of relevance to Putin's strategic conservatism, one of the first steps toward a fourth political theory is the, quote, global rehabilitation of tradition, unquote. All right, so far this article is trying to show us that Putin's speech at Valdai, where he articulated, how is it referred to up here, the first major and strong call for reinventing Russian ideology for Russia and the world, okay, crucial ideological vision being exported here or articulated, elaborated, has its deeper foundations in, or reflects at least, Alexander Dugan's fourth political theory. Whoops. So that's where we are in the article. Yet Putin not only determines in his speech that liberalism is not the end of history, but also shows similarities between liberalism, or more accurately progressive liberalism, and communism, ironically echoing anti-Kremlin conservative Polish philosopher and politician Legutko's book, The Demon in Democracy. Also recommended reading. If you guys have read The Demon in Democracy and you have something you'd like to say about it, throw that in the chat or in the comments. If you haven't, it should definitely be among the books you read to understand the crisis of modern progressive liberalism. This is how Legutko analyzes and criticizes communism and liberal democracy, which is the term he uses to refer to progressive liberalism. Quote, it goes without saying that everything in both communism and liberal democracy should be modern, i.e. against tradition, thinking, family, school, literature, and philosophy. If a thing, a quality, an attitude, an idea is not modern, it should be modernized or will end up in the dustbin of history. An unforgettable expression having as much relevance for the communist ideology as for the liberal democratic. This was a reason why the former communists so quickly found allies in liberal democracy, where the struggle for progress animates practically every aspect of individual and collective activities. Both systems generate, at least in their official ideological interpretations, a sense of liberation from the old bonds, i.e. history. Both want the past eradicated altogether, or at least made powerless as an object of relativizing or derision. Communism, as a system that started history anew, had to be in essence and in practice against memory. There are no better illustrations of how politically imposed amnesia helps in the molding of new man than the 20th century anti-utopias described in 1984 in Brave New World. The lessons of Orwell and Huxley were unfortunately quickly forgotten, Legutko continues. In my country, Poland, at the very moment when communism fell and the liberal democratic order was emerging, memory again became one of the main enemies. The apostles of the new order lost no time in denouncing it as a harmful burden hampering striving for modernity. So that was a quote from Legutko's book, The Demon in Democracy, which again shows the commonalities between liberal democracy and communism. And somebody else, by the way, is Leo Strauss in his book, Liberalism, Ancient and Modern. Sorry about the typo there. In the introduction to that book, he also describes how communism and liberalism both had commonalities, and that in order to get away from those commonalities or to have something else on the table, to be able to think about a genuine alternative, we need to reopen the possibility of ancient political philosophy, or as we're seeing it in this article, quote unquote, tradition. Somehow a move away from the modern, or like Dugan recently said in his interview with Thaddeus Russell on the Unregistered podcast, a combination of the pre-modern and the post-modern as a way to attack and to escape the modern. Okay, hello to those of you who are here. Again, Jordan Peterson submitted his National Post article recently about how he resigned as a tenured professor from the University of Toronto. And in that article, he referred to this article published by Memory, Middle Eastern Media Research Institute, which mentions Alexander Dugan in connection to Putin's articulation of a non-liberal, anti-liberal, conservative ideology. So those are the threads. Hello to those of you who are here, and thanks for the greetings in the chat. In his speech, the article continues, Putin, who considers history as a key element for shaping Russia's new ideology, actually states the following, quote, "Where are the humanitarian fundamentals of Western political thought? What are the general ethical limits in the world where the potential of science and machines are becoming almost boundless? Some people in the West believe that an aggressive elimination of entire pages from their own history, reverse discrimination against the majority in the interests of a minority, and the demand to give up the traditional notions of mother, father, family, and even gender, they believe that all of these are mileposts on the path towards social renewal." It's kind of a technological progressivist view that is kind of crazy. Likewise, I would like to point out once again that they have a right to do this. We're keeping out of this, Putin continues, but we would like to ask them to keep out of our business as well. We have a different viewpoint, at least the overwhelming majority of Russian society, it would be more correct to put it this way, has a different opinion on the matter. We believe that we must rely on our own spiritual values, our historical tradition, and the culture of our multi-ethnic nation. The advocates of so-called social progress believe they are introducing humanity to some kind of a new and better consciousness. Godspeed, hoist the flags, as we say, go right ahead. The only thing I want to say now is that their prescriptions are not new at all, and these are the passages that Peterson cites in his article. It may come as a surprise to some people, but Russia has been there already. After the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks, relying on the dogmas of Marx and Engels, also said that they would change existing ways and customs, and not just political and economic ones, but the very notion of human morality and the foundations of a healthy society. The destruction of age-old values, religion, and relations between people, up to and including the total rejection of family, we had that too, Putin notes parenthetically, encouragement to inform on loved ones, all this was proclaimed progress, and by the way, was widely supported around the world back then, and was quite fashionable, same as today. By the way, the Bolsheviks were absolutely intolerant of opinions other than theirs. This, I believe, should call to mind some of what we are witnessing now, and let me ask you, doesn't it? Looking at what is happening in a number of Western countries, we're amazed to see the domestic practices, which we fortunately have left, I hope, in the distant past. The fight for equality and against discrimination has turned into aggressive dogmatism bordering on absurdity, when the works of the great authors of the past, such as Shakespeare, or as Dugan has also noted in one of his talks, Dante, are no longer taught at schools or universities because their ideas are believed to be backwards. Incidentally, I'll just interrupt the quotation here. This is a big reason why MillermanSchool.com teaches Plato, Heidegger, Strauss, Dugan, Schmidt, because these authors are also either not taught at schools or universities, or they're taught through an overly liberal or leftist lens. They're taught as fascists. They're taught as people that you're not allowed to learn from or think about without, as it were, the authorities having to be alerted. The classics are declared backward and ignorant of the importance of gender or race. Putin continues. In Hollywood, memos are distributed about proper storytelling and how many characters of what color or gender should be in a movie. This is even worse than the agitprop department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Countering acts of racism is a necessary and noble cause, but the new cancel culture has turned it into reverse discrimination, that is, reverse racism. The obsessive emphasis on race is further dividing people when the real fighters for civil rights dreamed precisely about erasing differences and refusing to divide people by skin color. I specifically asked my colleagues, Putin continues, to find the following quote from Martin Luther King. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by their character. This is the true value. However, things are turning out differently there in the West, in America. By the way, the absolute majority of Russian people do not think that the color of a person's skin or their gender is an important matter. Each of us is a human being. This is what matters. Interrupting the quote for a minute, as we've discussed in other contexts before, there's more to being a human being than being an individual. Certainly more to being a human being than being your race or gender. So what Putin is suggesting here is a broader understanding of what it is to be human, one that includes culture, tradition, time, identity understood in a broader sense than the way you have it in Western liberal progressivism. Continuing though, in a number of Western countries, the debate over men's and women's rights has turned into a perfect phantasmagoria. Look, beware of going where the Bolsheviks once planned to go. Again, highlighting here the similarity between liberal democratic progressivism and Bolshevism, just like Leo Strauss had done in his time and in his way. Not only communalizing chickens, but also communalizing women. One more step and you will be there. These are remarks from Vladimir Putin's speech at Valdai. We're reading them from Middle Eastern Memory Research Institute article that Jordan Peterson quoted in his National Post letter recently widely circulated. Putin then adds, quote, zealots of these new approaches even go so far as to want to abolish these concepts altogether. Something we've talked about in many of our sessions together and much of our time together, especially Dugan's view that liberalism first sought to free itself from external authorities, and then once it had done so and became the last ideology standing, it sought to free itself from internal authorities, internal hierarchies, including every notion of nature, of limit, of boundary, of border, of the vertical of the soul, all of those kinds of things. That's your post-human logic of liberal progressivism. Anyone who dares mention that men and women actually exist, which is a biological fact, risks being ostracized. Parent number 1 and parent number 2, birthing parent instead of mother, human milk replacing breast milk because it might upset the people who are unsure about their own gender. Putin continues, I repeat, this is nothing new. In the 1920s, the so-called Soviet culture Traegers also invented some new speak, believing they were creating a new consciousness and changing values that way. And as I've already said, they made such a mess, it still makes one shudder at times. And yet, it's precisely what's going on here. And it makes us shudder, not just at times, but constantly. Not to mention some truly monstrous things when children are taught from an early age that a boy can easily become a girl and vice versa. Probably some of you may think bordering on child abuse, to put that into the heads of the young too early or at all. That is, the teachers actually impose on them a choice we all supposedly have. By the way, you just can't understate the importance of habituation of the young. As you learned from Aristotle, habituation is almost everything. Habituation in moral views, in what's right and wrong, in feeling pleasures at things that deserve to be estimated as pleasurable, and pains at the opposite. And yet we have our educators today indoctrinating the young in some truly ideologically perverse ways. As Peterson wrote in his National Post article, the one that quoted this article, that is, the teachers actually impose on them a choice we all supposedly have. Thanks, Victor, for the clarification. I'll go over to the chat in a minute. That is, the teachers actually, they do so while shutting the parents out of the process. Truly despicable, and forcing the child to make decisions that can upend their entire life. They do not even bother to consult with child psychologists. Is a child at this age even capable of making a decision of this kind? Calling a spade, this verges on a crime against humanity, Putin continues, and is being done in the name and under the banner of progress. Well, if someone likes this, let them do it. In other words, the West is allowed to have its liberal progressivism. I've already mentioned that in shaping our approaches, we will be guided by a healthy conservatism. That was a few years ago when passions on the international arena were not yet running as high as they are now. Although, of course, we can say that clouds were gathering even then. And again, to mention what I said earlier, I recommend you have a look at Putin's 2014 Valdai speech and see where things have gone since that time and what he was articulating then. Very important period where you see some ideological programs being articulated. Again, in line, I would say, with Dugan's political theory. Now, when the world is going through a structural disruption, the importance of reasonable conservatism as the foundation for a political course has skyrocketed precisely because of the multiplying risks and dangers and the fragility of the reality around us. Okay, I'm going to move to the conclusion in a minute, but I want to remind you, yesterday's stream, we looked at Russia's strategic conservatism. Today, we're looking at Russia's new conservative ideology to counter liberalism, because Putin was mentioned in Peterson's National Post article, which you should read or see his reading of. And just popping over to the chat here for a minute, Germany have pivoted toward Russia of late due to energy. Macron is no fan of woke. Le Pen and Zemmour have turned France to the right. Could Europe turn away from the global American empire? Yes, this is a big question. I posted on my Twitter last night that Russia is the biggest leading exporter of based ideology. What I mean is that even though there are countries that oppose the West, that are anti-liberal, anti-modern, I don't know that anybody has articulated a comprehensive ideological counterposition that's not just like narrowly quote-unquote Islamofascist or something like that, but that can in principle appeal to different peoples, different cultures, different movements. And in these comments, I'm not endorsing it, I'm just noting it. And as you see here, it's crucial to understand and to consider, if you at all agree with the proposition that Western liberalism has become decadent, degraded, perverse, pathetic, dangerous, and all of that. Conclusion of this Russia's new conservative ideology to counter liberalism article. Let's read it. Putin has smartly introduced himself into the debate that already exists in the Western world about liberalism, and more specifically progressive liberalism. If Putin manages to outline a new conservative ideology, and he can do so on the basis of the many decades of work that Alexander Dugan has produced, for example, then Russia would become a political and ideological pole for conservatives also in the US and Europe, just as we were talking about Fraser and those of you in the chat. Absolutely. This is one of the key questions facing the ideological analysis of global affairs today. And it's in part why my school has a course on Dugan's book, The Fourth Political Theory, on Dugan's 20-plus volume book series, No Omachia, because if we have any concern with Russian anti-liberalism, with Putin's conservatism, you're not going to get a more thorough statement of its potentials than you will studying Dugan. This is already partly happening in some European countries. Ironically, we could witness a new Cold War, but with reversed roles. Really fascinating layout here. The West would be a pole for progressive liberal communist ideology, just as we saw above in the remarks, for example, of Legutko, while Russia would represent the conservative pole. Oh, how the tables have turned. Even more ironically, Eastern European countries that rebelled against the Soviet Union, mainly Hungary and Poland, now have conservative elected governments that in the future may look at Moscow as an ideological point of reference. This is what there is to think about to the extent that we're considering the ideological dimension of global affairs. Hi, Bruce. I really appreciate that. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. Of course, When Putin talks about healthy conservatism, he's not referring to Ronald Reagan's liberal conservatism, since the main future of the Russian regime remains authoritarian. So let me just make a quick comment here. Many in the West, when they hear the word conservatism, they think about liberal conservatism or neoconservatism or somehow market-oriented conservatism. And it's Russian political theory 101 that when you hear the term conservatism in the Russian context, you should absolutely not interpret it as liberal conservatism, neoconservatism, or market conservatism. There's a chapter in Alexander Dugan's book, The Fourth Political Theory, about the varieties of conservatism, and another in the other book called The Rise of the Fourth Political Theory. And I've talked about it in different contexts on this channel, but conservatism for the Russian or Eurasian context absolutely is opposite this type of thing. So let's just go back. Sorry, I wanted to give you that quick aside. When Putin talks about healthy conservatism, he's not referring to Ronald Reagan's liberal conservatism, since the main nature of the Russian regime remains authoritarian. Karaganov actually described Russia's political system as authoritarian democracy. It's worth noting that he believes that the whole world is moving toward a kind of combination of authoritarian democracy or democratic authoritarianism. What do you guys think about that claim? Putin also thinks so. In particular, he sees the West's progressive liberalism as intolerant of other people's views in the same way that Bolshevism was. And come on, guys, that's, at least for Jordan Peterson, who's our reference point here because of his National Post article, indisputable, right? It's the reason he resigned from his tenured position at the University of Toronto, because of the intolerance of Western progressive liberalism to genuine inquiry, genuine science and philosophy, and free thought. This view was also shared by conservatives in the West. For example, British conservative commentator John O'Sullivan, former vice president and executive editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, noted, quote, "Liberal democracy has policies and prohibitions built into its ideological structure. It is not really open to institutions and policies that run counter to its liberationist instincts. It increasingly restricts their freedom to maneuver on anything from parental rights to national sovereignty. It is even hostile to some fundamental values of liberalism, such as free speech. Accordingly, it sometimes comes up against the wishes of the voters expressed in elections and referenda." Unquote. Okay, those of you who don't know, this guy, I have to mention him. Many of you will know him, obviously, but not all of you. For some of you, it'll be new. Leo Strauss has a book called Persecution and the Art of Writing. A lot of that book is chapters on difficult Jewish thinkers like Judah Halevi, Spinoza, and Maimonides, but the first few chapters have something to do with persecution. Hold on, something is stuck on the screen. Somebody's saying? Well, okay, I'll deal with that in a second. I just want to finish this thought. In Persecution and the Art of Writing, Leo Strauss suggests that there has never been a time where heterodox thought is not persecuted. That even in liberalism, there is a... Oh, yeah. Sorry, Victor. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm using this program that has all kinds of things on screen, and I just apologize about that. Everybody who's been watching, and Victor, and thank you for the comment and for the reminder. Let's see, how did that happen, by the way, that got put on screen? Oh, I see. I can just put comments up on screen like that. All right, well, what can I tell you? I'm new to these overlays, but thank you for pointing it out. Now we know how to do it well. So yeah, Leo Strauss in Persecution, the Art of Writing, Leo Strauss in his other writings showed that it was a fallacy from the start to think that liberal democracy could just let 1,000 intellectual flowers bloom. It is as unforgiving of alternative positions as non-liberal democratic political ideologies are, which is why Strauss himself had recourse at times to writing between the lines, and why people who work on Strauss can still be persecuted in liberal democratic contexts and circumstances. But all right, enough about that. Guys, I just want to take a minute here and apologize for having that comment stuck on screen for so long. Not that there's anything wrong with the comment or with Victor. I just didn't realize what I had done. Let's finish the article. It's worth noting that as much as Russia wants to look east, it continues to mainly look west. The search to shape an ideology is aimed to compete politically with the West while simultaneously attracting conservatives in the West who no longer have strong leadership. Despite Russia's willingness to ally itself with China, the Kremlin openly criticizes communist ideology as outdated and totalitarian, showing that Moscow will never be subordinate to Beijing. As Putin said, quote, beware of going where the Bolsheviks once planned to go. Furthermore, to shape a new ideology for Russia means sovereignty, as Karaganov explains. It means to have influence and to project power to further its political and economic interests. After the fall of the Soviet Union, many of the Russian elites were reluctant to adopt a national ideology, but it seems that for Putin, the time has come for a new Russian ideology for Russia and the world. And here you have the author, Anna Mayer-Barducci. Okay. It seems that for Putin to underscore this, the time has come for a new Russian ideology for Russia and the world. Now, again, if you look at the Valdai speech from 2014, you'll see that this is not a project that began yesterday. And I want to remind you of the claim in this article that, to a certain extent, we can see Putin's presentation of a conservative alternative to Western liberal progressivism as an outline of what Russian anti-liberal philosopher Alexander Dugan calls the fourth political theory. And therefore, those of you who want to do a deeper dive into the foundations of Dugan's thought and into the foundations of Putin's anti-liberalism, you should look at some of the work that people have done on Alexander Dugan. As you know, I've translated several of his books. I have given many interviews about his thought. I have a lot of free essays. And if you want to support my work and go even deeper, then you can take the courses on Dugan that I have at the Millerman School. Okay, but there's a reason we're not just sitting around here and doing some sort of trivial, theoretical navel gazing. One of the reasons we try to understand people like Dugan is because his ideas are operationalized to an extent by people like Putin and therefore have a geopolitical relevance. They help us to understand what's going on in the world. They help us to orient ourselves in the world. They help us to analyze the ideological dimension of global affairs. All right, let me now just put some other things up on screen and then we'll see where we go next. So you should see this article again, just to tie it together. I know people come and go from these streams, watch them and rewatch them. Not everybody sits through from beginning to end. So in the National Post, the Canadian newspaper, Jordan Peterson published this article, Why I Am No Longer a Tenured Professor at the University of Toronto. The appalling ideology of diversity, inclusion, and equity is demolishing education and business. On his YouTube channel, he reads this, so there's no point in redoing that. You can go see him reading it or just read it yourself. But in this article, he mentioned what we just read. Putin on liberalism. Putin on the Bolshevik nature of Western liberal progressivism. That's where he does so. Finally, quoting Peterson, do you know that Vladimir Putin himself is capitalizing on this woke madness? And then he gives an extended quotation from the article and writes this, that this from the head of the former totalitarian enterprise, Putin, against whom we fought a 5 decades long Cold War, risking the entire planet in a very real manner. This cautionary warning about Western liberal progressivism from the head of a country riven in a literally genocidal manner by ideas that Putin himself attributes to the progressives in the West, to the generally accepting audience of his once burned, twice shy listeners. All right, so I recommend read Peterson's article if you can. Read some of those speeches by Putin at Valdai. Have a look at materials by Alexander Dugan to the extent that any of this is interesting to you. And I couldn't help but point out, just for fun, that Jordan Peterson is not the only doctor or, let's say, University of Toronto affiliated academic who left because of, as he puts it here, he wrote in his article, I am academic persona non grata because of my unacceptable philosophical positions. And here you see the same newspaper, the National Post, just for fun, showing you that in 2018, when I was still nice and young, naive philosopher or far-right propagandist, U of T awards PhD to translator of sanctioned Russian neo-fascist. Who do you think they mean there? Yes, of course, it's our very own Alexander Dugan. Okay, so Michael Millerman, Jordan Peterson, Alexander Dugan, the whole problem of Western liberalism, the whole issue of a conservative alternative, these are some of the issues linking today's, the topics of today's live stream. And once again, not trying to be too salesy here, okay, just trying to show those of you who are interested in this kind of thing that I have a course on Dugan in my school, millermanschool.com, dugancourse.com. And most importantly, from one perspective, even if you don't want to pay any money to take the course, there is a nice free playlist here I paid to have somebody make. It's about an hour long, and it includes clips from every lecture in the course. So at the very least, you may be able to get some value from that, even if you have no money to spend and no desire to spend money. And that said, I hope some of you do get the course. Here's a coupon code. Yeah, because Dugan turned 60 this year, so I made a 60% off coupon code. Okay, going to the chat. Let me get that off screen. Hang on. Let's go over here. How come any political philosophy trying to be constructed by Russia is automatically deemed propaganda? Okay, now that I know how to do this, let's just do that. How come any political philosophy trying to be constructed by Russia is automatically deemed propaganda, but any philosophy constructed in Western universities are genuine philosophy? I think that's a good question. It's one that we raised in yesterday's live stream as well, because the Strategic Conservatism article suggested that there's really a strategic dimension to Russia's political philosophy without addressing the question, is it somehow theoretically or philosophically, axiologically, truer to the nature of political life than Western progressive liberalism? So I think there's some cynicism in that perspective that that you're capturing with your comment, and an unwillingness and inability to raise the questions and do the tasks of genuine political philosophy. Somehow everything, like Heidegger has taught us, comes to be seen as machinational, as will to power, as uprooted from the question of its truth and its legitimacy. Leo Strauss said the same thing in his own way. Dugan says the same thing in his own way. So if you see all thinking, including political philosophizing and political theorizing, as just instrumental activity in the service of some political interests, then you can never have the intention of being interested in the truth. But the intention of being interested in the truth is part of the enterprise of political philosophy. So yeah, anyway, good question. And it's a serious problem. Western academics need to begin to do political philosophy in a better way. And by the way, what's on screen here, I don't know, this is maybe kind of ridiculous, but you know, in the last stream I had some music playing. It's not like got a copyright mark against it, but there's music here that I won't get a copyright mark against because it's mine. There we go. I'm going to be ending the stream in a minute. Just needed to have something on screen. Michael Millerman, do you think we're seeing Dugan's vision of Last War of the World Island play out? Good question. It looks like the way things are going, we're rolling towards multipolarity, and that Russia has an important... okay, let's stop that. That Russia has an important role to play in the multipolar world as the leading exporter of multipolar ideology. Let's just get that comment on screen. So excited to have learned how to do that. So Last War of the World Island, guys, those of you who don't know, who just see that on screen, there's a book called The Geopolitics of Contemporary Russia, published in English, written by Dugan. I translated it, used the pseudonym, the first and only and last time that I do something like that pseudonymously. And you guys should definitely have a look at the book, and you'll see that Putin hasn't just started thinking about a conservative alternative to liberal progressivism yesterday. This is a long-standing intellectual project and political project. Okay, let's go back to the comments. By philosophy, methinks you mean ideology. This somebody writes, well, we have to learn to make a distinction between political philosophy, political ideology, political science, political theory, social theory. These are all distinct concepts. In my opinion, the best resource on that particular topic is Leo Strauss. If you read his essay, What is Political Philosophy? And again, not to be salesy, just to tell you, I have a course on Leo Strauss in my school where we discuss his essay, What is Political Philosophy? And he distinguishes political philosophy from political science, from political theory. And of course, we need to distinguish it from ideology as well. Good stuff, guys. I appreciate everybody who's here, who's been watching, who's commenting. I appreciate the super chat. Those of you who have known me for a long time, again, just thank you for being fellow travelers. Those of you who are new, welcome. Just having a look here at the, you know what, maybe I can put the How does this work? There we go. Okay. Are you aware of the three telos model and how it maps to the three main ideologies? I don't exactly know what that is, the three telos model. So feel free, if you want, throw it in the comments. I'll probably end the stream here shortly. If you throw it in the comments, though, I may find a chance to comment later. Jordan Peterson accuses Putin of capitalizing on the woke, accusing him of being insincere. I did not get the sense that Peterson means Putin is insincere, although you might be right, just not the sense that I got. I think Putin is not just capitalizing, but really opposes progressive, liberal, and woke ideology. Totally agree with you there. And I think we have many, whoops, amateur hour over here. Sorry about that. I agree with you that we have many good reasons to think that Putin is genuinely not a supporter of progressive, liberal, and woke ideology. What else did we have here? Slightly off topic. How does Dugan marry his Eurasianism with his understanding of the narod? What he suggests that many nations should be multi-narod, multi-ethnic. I'm not going to give you a long answer here. I'm just going to say I recommend you have a look at Dugan's ethno-sociology books. One is called Ethnos and Society. One is called Ethno-Sociology, The Foundations. I translated them. Arctos published them. And also I have an article. It was published in a peer-reviewed academic journal, but don't hold that against me. It's called The Existential and Ethno-Sociological Dimensions of Alexander Dugan's Populism. So you may find something there about the narod. And the distinction between ethnos, narod, nation, civil society, global society, and post-society, all important topics and concepts. Will Ukraine balkanize? You can let me know what you think. I'm not going to speculate, although seems like it might. What do you think about the current situation in Ukraine? Do you think there will be a Russian invasion? I'm not privy to any inside information there, but it definitely seems possible given what I've been reading. What else do we have? AGD60, that's a coupon code for the Dugan course. If you want to take it, save some money on it. Jacob said, good morning, good morning. Fraser Gus, okay. No need to apologize. All right, well, as I said, good to be with everybody. To summarize super quickly, we were discussing the Middle Eastern Media Research Institute. That's memory.org. I'll put it in the, well, yeah, I was going to drop it in the, this is the website, Middle Eastern Memory Research Institute.org, and in the Jordan Peterson National Post article where he goes on the offensive against diversity, inclusion, and equity, he mentions that article by Putin. So you can have a look at all of that. I hope you've enjoyed the stream. I enjoyed spending time together with you. We'll do more of this kind of thing where it's reading and commenting at the same time. And that's it. Have a nice day. Bye.